In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Glory to thee, our God, glory to thee, O heavenly King, comforter, Spirit of truth, who abides everywhere and fills all things. Treasury of good things, giver of life, come and abide in us, cleanse us from all impurity, and save our soul for good. All right. Brownie, you might have a hard time seeing, just so you know. If you want to move, that might be advisable. Welcome. So, this is, actually, I wanted to hand this up. Thank you. I need the keys. So, I don't know, have all of you gotten a copy of this flyer just to kind of, okay, I mean, I would encourage you to look at it, take one. Maybe Dwayne, can you just do the honors of giving everybody one if they don't have it? And then, John, can you actually give everybody, this is totally unrelated to my class, but it's a great flyer. I just came across it and I wanted to hand it out. So it's kind of a little timeline. We're not going to use it, but yeah, we're not going to use it, but it really is a really a very good and I would say fairly comprehensive timeline of church history. So kind of something you can look at later. Good to have you all here. So what I'm going to do today is so the first, if you look at the title of the first class, it says, what is Orthodox Christianity? So you can go in like 1,000 directions with that. So what I decided to do is I decided today that I really want to just kind of stay at a very high elevation. I'm going to be at like 30,000 feet this whole class. And what I really want to do is I've taken, and I can show you right here, I've basically taken, come on, 5 sort of founding principles of orthodoxy. And we're just going to look at each one in turn. So the first one is apostolic succession, which we'll talk about more in a minute. Basically, the historical continuity of the early church. The second one is fidelity to the original faith. So that's what I call doctrinal continuity. The third one is continuity of worship, right? So liturgical continuity or argument. 4 is the witness of the early church fathers, so the early saints, the early writers, sort of everybody that sort of came in the first 3-4 centuries that really defined the faith. And then lastly, the conciliar authority versus centralized authority, which kind of stereotypically, right, that's like the Pope versus like councils or something like that. So we're gonna talk about my goal today is to sort of unpack and not really defend, but certainly in some sense kind of present an argument for sort of the legitimacy of the Orthodox Church as the one church founded by Christ. That's my goal. So, and by the way, you are more than welcome to interrupt me at any time. In fact, I would prefer it because it makes it for a more sort of organic gathering, and then you don't forget your questions and all that good stuff. So let us begin. So starters, apostolic succession. So we're in the creed, which we say at church every Sunday, and we say in our private prayer every morning and every evening, hopefully. One of the things we say at the end of the creed is we say we believe in one holy Catholic and apostolic church, right? Apostolic. So the word apostolic really has sort of 2 meanings. One is the one that I'm going to focus on. The word apostolic, sort of from the Greek, actually means to be sent out. Literally, it means to be sent out. So part of the meaning of the word apostolic, when we say we believe in one holy Catholic and apostolic church, is that the church is not a ghetto, for lack of a better way of putting it, right? The church, right from the beginning, I mean, if you look at the book of Acts, right, it goes from Jerusalem, then it goes to like Samaria and Judea, then it goes to the whole Roman Empire, and of course, today it's in the whole world. But that's not the one I want to focus on. The apostolic meaning that I want to focus on is this idea that some people have called it like a golden chain. And what they mean by that is that the apostles, and you see this in like Paul's letters, for example, that they chose kind of people that were worthy and trustworthy and knowledgeable and pious and devout and committed, right? And they handed the tradition, right, down to them, right? And what we would say is that kept going, right? That kept going all the way to today. So my bishop, his name is he's a metropolitan, but he's a bishop, whatever. He can actually trace his ordination all the way back to one of the 12 apostles. I don't know which one, but I know he can. The previous bishop he could trace it back to St. Andrew, I think, was who it was. So when we talk about apostolic succession, what we're talking about is sort of this continuity, right, of sort of passing the baton from one generation to the next, right? So I'll read what it says here. If Christ founded a visible church led by the apostles, and that church continues historically, then the body that can demonstrably trace its leadership in life back to them has the strongest claim to be that church. Kind of makes sense, right? I mean, if it's true, I mean, I guess you could say that if at some point all of the truth was lost, and then it was, I'm going to pick on Protestants, forgive me. And then it was, for some reason, from like the year 100 to the year 1500, there was just, everything got lost. And then somehow in the year 1500, it was all found again. Then you could say that's not true, right? But I think most of us, if we just listen to that argument that it was lost for 1400 years, it seems untenable. And the probability of being able to find it after it having been lost for 1400 years seems very problematic at the least, right? So this is one of the arguments, I would say, for sort of the veracity of orthodoxy, is this apostolic succession, this sort of historical continuity. And here, this is kind of a funny quote because you could go in different ways with it. But basically, Christ says here, he says, and I also say to you that you are Peter, and on this rock, so the rock we would say is his confession of faith that Jesus is the Son of the living God. On this rock I will build my church, and that church word is tin ecclesian, which is the singular, meaning one church. That's what I want to stress. And the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it. So what this seems to say, I mean, at least my interpretation, is that Christ founded one church, right? And that it would never disappear, right? And so if that's true, then at a minimum, we have to say there is a church out there that is the one church that Christ founded, and that would be the one I want to be part of. I think that's a reasonable thing to say, if we want to be Christians, of course. If not, then it's neither here nor there. St. Irenaeus of Lyons, and one other thing I'll say that's very significant, and I always put the years up of these writers because I think it's significant to kind of know when they wrote, because some people will say that once the church became legal, right? So there was this event, I think it was 314. It's actually on that timeline. I think it was 314, where St. Constantine legalized Christianity in the empire. And there are some people that will say that basically once it was legalized, it sort of just fell into kind of apostasy, which I could, okay. I mean, there's arguments for that, neither here nor there. They'll say that, like, the emperor took over and he kind of wrote the creed and it was his thing. And there's a whole lot of directions you go with that. But so here we see a guy who lived long before 314, right? St. Irenaeus of Lyons. And this is what he says, kind of in relation to apostolic succession. He says, we can enumerate those who were appointed bishops in the churches by the apostles, right? So the succession, and their successors down to our own time. For if the apostles had known hidden mysteries, they would have delivered them especially to those to whom they were also committing the churches, right? Makes sense? So basically what he's saying is, like, the apostles would not have failed to convey to their successors the fullness of the truth, right? I mean, they'd be asking for disaster if they did that. So that's what St. Irenaeus is saying. He's saying that, that whole, the premise is that the disciples found worthy men, and they made sure that they were trained and knew the truth, knew the fullness of the revealed truth. And that's who they passed it down to. And then they passed it down to the next generation, who passed it down to the next generation, and so on. Any questions? Yeah, please don't shy.
That apostolic succession, because they kept record of who was.
100%. Well, that's how my bishop can trace himself back to one of the 12. So they knew who, correct.
the Jews when they returned from the exile from Babylon,
Yeah.
that was one of the things that they started doing. They checked the families.
That's true. That's different. That was more, yeah. I mean, the Jews were very concerned about being able to trace themselves back really to Abraham. So for them, it was more of a genetic thing because if you weren't, like for example, I think the big issue was whether or not they were from the tribe of Aaron, because if they weren't, they couldn't serve as priests in the temple.
Right.
I think that's in Nehemiah in the Old Testament, but that's different. But certainly, I mean, it's the same premise. Brianna.
Does this have to become Catholic Orthodox?
It doesn't. I think it is pure. It's Western centric. It does not. So, well, hold on one sec. That is not entirely true. So, 451, the Fourth Ecumenical Council, that is when what we now know as the Coptic Church or the Oriental Orthodox, whatever you want to call it, that was the dividing point. It doesn't really talk about it, but that's what it was. 451, Fourth Ecumenical Council in Chalcedon, that's when what we now know as the Coptics, that's when they broke off. Is that? Well, we were all just one church. Yeah, up to that point. I mean, there were little groups that broke off, but sort of there was. Help yourself. Yeah. Adrian, can you make sure he? Yeah, Sherry. And so I don't want to spend a lot of time on the timeline. The timeline, just for the record, is really just sort of like a little bonus item. We will be talking about sort of the history of the church in a future class. So that I just gave just because I found it interesting and I wanted to share it. Yeah, so in part 3, on June 22nd, we'll be talking about the story of the church, and this will be covered much more. So I don't want to answer a lot of questions on that. It was more just a kind of a factoid. Real quick, Sherry, I don't want to go too far into that, though.
Oh, I just, okay.
Go tell me real quick.
Yes, the Pentecost, right?
Yep.
Pentecost, the church, was built.
I mean, people say that was the birthday of the church. And that was certainly the day. That was the day the Holy Spirit came down and really empowered the disciples to go out and do their work.
So my understanding is this church is being the physical church, right?
Well, I mean, I would say that
you can see just like here, the physical church.
Yes, and I don't want to go too far down that road. I'll say really quickly what I'll say is, and other people have asked me this, but the Orthodox understanding of church, right? So there's a term for the study of the church. It's called ecclesiology, right? So Orthodox ecclesiology believes that there is one definitive church, right? We don't believe in, I forget what they call it in the kind of in the Protestant understanding, the invisible church. Yeah, we do not believe in that.
Yeah.
We believe that there is a church. We believe that the people, if you want to know like who is in the church, what you got to do is you got to go to every Orthodox church on the planet and look at all the names of all the people that have been baptized and chrismated in that canonical Orthodox church. So now we don't necessarily wouldn't say by extension that everyone outside of the church is going to hell, right? I don't want to go too far down that road, but we absolutely believe there is one finite and definable church. We reject this idea of an invisible church. And the fact is, the invisible church doesn't even make any sense, because how can you have people in different quote unquote churches who believe, one believes that the body and blood becomes in fact the body and blood of Christ, and one doesn't. I mean, that's logically impossible. I mean, that concept to me just, I don't know how anyone could ever accept it, because it doesn't make any logical sense. John?
So apostolic succession, or kind of that talk you had earlier about how that creates one church. I think in the Acts, maybe to the Corinthians, Paul's letter, it talks about not breaking up the church. It talks about the possibility of many churches, and that's what they were trying to fight against. And so when you talk about the distance between when the apostles were here in the year 1500, where a lot of the schisms,
well, that was when everything blew up.
Or whatever,
Correct.
1500, there were a lot of schisms.
Yeah.
I feel like that the writing of Paul to, I think it's the Corinthians, talking about that split. If you take all of the fathers of the Orthodox Church and you read about the fights they had to commit to one religion
Yeah,
and all the fights and all the martyrdoms, and
yeah.
all the, I don't know how you can get away from having one church except for maybe Catholicism, because they would have that same claim.
Well, ostensibly, but I mean, even in Paul's writings, I mean, really, like probably the easiest example is, the idea of sort of those of the circumcised, right? So there was in the early church, the church was sort of trying to understand its relationship to Judaism. And there were people that said all the pagan converts need to be circumcised. Now, in the end, that's not, and they need to, not eat pork and all these other Jewish Mosaic kind of rules, right? So there were absolutely there. I mean, there was a lot of contention to figure out exactly what. I mean, the fact is, even allowing pagans to be in the church, like that was huge because the church understood, I mean, the Jews understood Christ as the Jewish Messiah. And so like when you have like Cornelius, right? Or you have, who were the big ones? Well, Cornelius was one. I think Barnabas went to Antioch and then the Holy Spirit came down on these pagans. So that was like, wow, they were like, whoa, this is not what we thought was going to happen. Right. So no question. Yeah, there was a lot. I mean, you even see like the saints, I think like St. John Chrysostom and St. Cyril, maybe of Alexandria, they would go at it, and they're all both saints, right? So yeah, but I don't know if that answers what you're.
No, I think that's sensibly what I was talking about is just the fact that there's so many people in those 1,500 years or whatever, not quite 1,500 years,
Yeah,
that fought for one faith and to keep it as one.
sure. Yeah.
That's what Paul was preaching in all of his writings.
Yes.
Keep it as one faith.
100%.
Allow the Gnostics, all that.
100%. 100%.
Father P,
Yes,
this is
Christine.
Can you?
Yep.
Okay. We just were wondering, like, if the Catholic Church claims apostolic succession and the Oriental Orthodox Church does as well, how do we know that we're the one church? If
I mean, I think the argument we would make. So the question was like, what about the Coptic Church or the Roman Catholic Church's claim to apostolic succession? Because ostensibly they could make that argument. I think what we would say is that in veering from the truth, right? I mean, for example, papal infallibility or the filioque, you can't you lose the grace of sort of apostolic succession when you lose the truth. Does that make sense? So when you don't have the truth, you can't. I mean, the reality is the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church can't both be the church because they don't agree. Right. And the Coptics and the Orthodox and the Catholics, all three of us cannot logically be the same church. Right. So I would say the only conclusion I can draw from that is that if you don't, once you stop following the truth, then you just lose, the grace goes bye-bye. Does that make sense, Christine?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. And the other?
It's really not about the apostolic succession. It's about Nicaea.
Well, it's about preserving the truth. Ultimately, that's what it is. I mean, I think we would say that, like if a bishop sort of like ordains himself and he's not a canonical bishop, even if he teaches the truth. So I think both are needed. So there needs to be that continuity because I think the church says that clearly. And we'll look at some of the canons in a minute, but there also needs to be the truth, right? So they're both, which is good because that one secures the other, right? Dawson.
Would you say maybe like that all, well, it was one church, all of this continuity of people with the apostolic succession all have authority, but then when the Coptics split off, their act of schism renders that authority gone because they're no longer part of the church?
I would say, I mean, they're no longer in the truth at that point, right? They've accepted something that isn't true. I mean, in the case of the Coptics, we would say their understanding of who Christ is erroneous, and we would say that the same applies to the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, they ostensibly could trace themselves. Obviously the Pope can trace himself back to Peter, but we would say that in accepting wrong teachings, they have severed themselves from the church.
And their authority that is like they lose their authority
Yeah.
based on schism.
I mean, that authority is partly based on truth,
Hmm.
right? So if you don't have the truth, you don't have the authority, I would say. I mean, as I said a minute ago, I would say that there's I think the church would say that the key, there's two components, maybe there's more, but these are the two that I'm thinking of right now. One is having a legitimate legacy, like a legitimate, being a legitimate successor to Peter or Paul or Barnabas or whoever, John. That's one. And the other is maintaining the truth. So they have to be together, though. So if someone just sets up shop, 2 blocks up the street and starts saying, well, I'm going to teach the truth, and everything is coming out of his dogmatic Orthodox theology book, we would say that's true, but we'd say you're not the church, because you can't just set up your own church. In the same way that if a bishop started espousing heresy, he would be cut off and he wouldn't be Orthodox. Does that make sense? There might be more, but those are the two things that kind of come to mind. Hippolytus of Rome, 3rd century, again, pre-legalization of Christianity. Let the bishop be ordained after he has been chosen by all the people, right? So you see this kind of conciliatory, right? People come together and they elect the bishop. With the laying on of the hands of the bishops who have received the succession from the apostles. Council of Antioch. So one of the things in Orthodoxy that you may or may not be aware of is a lot. So if you were to ask what is the sort of supreme authoritative thing in Orthodoxy, we would say it is the ecumenical councils. So there were 7 councils that we call ecumenical, and those are like not, the case is closed. Those are not up for debate. If someone says, you know what, I think Christ isn't fully God, well, you're just not Orthodox. That has been decided. So everything that 7 ecumenical councils have decreed, those are just not up for debate. And in most cases, at least the first, the second, maybe the third and the fourth, the West, I mean, Protestantism would agree. Obviously, normative Protestants believe that Christ is fully God and fully man. That's not up for debate. But the councils, so there were 7 ecumenical councils, but there were many other councils. And some of them were considered more significant, some of them were less significant. One of the things the councils did, in addition to kind of clarifying our understanding of theology, was also to make sort of, I don't want to call them rules, but sort of, defining how things are done, some kind of putting some bureaucratic structure to the church. So one of the councils here in Antioch, in the year 341, it says, a bishop shall not be ordained without a synod and the presence of the metropolitan. Right. So typically a bishop cannot be ordained unless there's 3 bishops ordaining him. Right. And again, why do you think that is? Yeah. So because they're all, if they're not all Orthodox, they're not, he's gonna be like, well, wait, you're not Orthodox, I'm not going to ordain him with you. Right. So it's kind of a checks and balance within the church. Right. Why this matters? This expands the same principle. Ordination must happen within the existing church structure, and apostolic succession is preserved through the conciliar oversight. So conciliar means the church coming together in a council or as a group, right? So that is what sort of undergirds this first point. Any questions? Because we're about to switch to the next item. All right. The next item is fidelity to the Orthodox faith, or doctrinal continuity. So the argument is the true church must teach the same faith, and we're quoting from the book of Jude, once delivered to the saints. If a body adds or changes doctrine, it departs from the original church. I think we could all agree with that. It's kind of logically sound. The Orthodox would say, we have not changed, others have. That's what the Orthodox would say.
What are your thoughts on I believe it's the current Pope in the Patriarch of Constantinople? They signed a document where they're committing to get back into full communion.
Well, if they can do that, that would be great. That's my thought. I am very, I don't want to editorialize too much. I am very doubtful that the Catholic and the Orthodox could come back together, because we have just grown further and further apart. And I don't see, with God, all things are possible, but it would take, I would say, a pretty substantial miracle for that, because there's just lots of issues. There's There's literally 1,000 years of saints they venerate that we would say are not saints at all. And we have 1,000 years of saints that we venerate and they would say are not saints at all, right? We'd have to figure out what is a hierarch. Is the Pope? Is he, because really the Pope is sort of like a super, I like to call him like a super bishop. He's not really a bishop. I mean, he's above the bishop. So he's like, there's all the bishops and then there's the Pope who's like a super bishop. So do we accept that? Or do they say, no, we're going to get rid of the Pope?
But
Good luck.
I mean, the patriarch is accepting that there is enough goodness in the Catholic Church to be back in communion, because we wouldn't go back to communion with Arians, right? That deny Christ.
Well, no. I mean, obviously that's complete heresy.
Yeah, that there wouldn't be any compatibility.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, so I'm not sure if this is what you're asking, but a while ago, I gave a tour of the church to a group of Protestants. There was like a bunch of eighth graders, and they came for their class to learn about the church. And I kind of like dawned on me, and I said this to them, is that not necessarily in Catholicism, but probably to some extent in Protestantism, because they generally have a lower understanding of Holy Communion, right? Whatever that is. I'm not going to get into that because there's a lot of different examples. Generally in the West, in Protestantism, the thinking, I would say, is let's all have communion and then we can come to agreement on all the hard theological things. But the Orthodox would say, first we come to the agreement on the hard theological things, and then we have communion. And that makes sense because we believe that the body and blood of Christ is, in fact, the body and blood of Christ. And St. Paul says, he who eats unworthily eats and drinks judgment to himself. I mean, that's what Paul says himself. So clearly, Paul had a fairly high theology of Holy Communion. And even Christ says, unless you eat the body and drink the flesh, drink the blood of the Son of Man, you have no life in you. Right? So this is kind of the Orthodox understanding. I don't know if that made any sense or applied to your question or not. Brianna, do you have questions for me?
Well, just recently, we had a bishop,
So, I mean, again, it's one thing to sort of endeavor to take steps to reunite. It's another thing to reunite. So all I know is right now we're not reunited, and I personally think it's very doubtful that it would happen in any real way.
The one thing
That's just that's me. Another priest might tell you he thinks it's going to happen next year. So you're getting the editorialization of Father Pandalemon.
and maybe this to be more realistic. I think I actually heard that the heads of the Oriental Orthodox.
If you speak, I would ask you maybe just to try to. Can you be my mic man?
Absolutely.
You can be my mic man. There you go.
I had seen recently that the head of the Oriental Orthodox Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church were speaking.
I mean, that's always going on. That's been going on forever. I mean, so it doesn't necessarily mean much. That would be
niceties.
Yeah. I mean, that's been going on forever. I mean, even like I know the Patriarch of Constantinople who was the last pope that passed away like 5 years ago or something?
Francis.
Yeah, he went to the funeral and he was there and there was photos of him there. But again, the real question is, can we go to their church and receive communion, and can they come to ours and receive communion? That is the question. And if the answer is no, then we're not the same church. Well, we're the church and they're not, or they're the church and we're not, right? But that is it. There's really no other metric that matters, I would say. So, well, but again, baptism, why do you get baptized? You get baptized so you can receive communion. But communion is really in some sense, communion is the sacrament of sacraments. It's like, just like what the Pope is to the bishops in the Roman Catholic Church, communion is to all the other sacraments in the Orthodox Church. It is like the super sacrament, I would say. Because that all the purpose of all the other sacraments is to lead us. I mean, in the wedding service, at least it used to be, that the couple would, their wedding would be solemnized or whatever through communion, right? So communion is really it for us. But fidelity to the original faith. So we already read that. Okay. St. Vincent of Lérins. quote, "We must take the greatest care to hold that which has been believed everywhere, always, and by all, for that is truly and properly Catholic." And of course, he's not using the word Catholic like we might think. So Catholic, in this case, it means universal. St. Athanasius, who was a tremendous defender of the faith, and I think was sent into exile. He was the Patriarch of Alexandria. He was sent into exile like 5 times because he was preaching the truth, and there were all these Arians and other people that taught wrong things that hated him. And this is what he says. "Let us look at the very tradition, teaching, and faith of the Catholic Church from the beginning, which the Lord gave, the apostles preached, and the fathers kept." St. Irenaeus of Lyons. Again, now here we got a guy who's 180 AD, so this is a long time ago. Having received this preaching and this faith, the church, although scattered throughout the whole world, yet as if occupying but one house, carefully preserves it. Why this matters, Irenaeus highlights the church's universal and consistent preservation of the same faith across time and place. And we're going to come across that again, and that's an important thing. Our understanding is the church is not invented. The church is a revealed reality that we can either enter into or we cannot enter into. Right? It's not my creation. God has revealed it. He's revealed the truth, right? And it's my decision if I want to enter into that or not, right? But it isn't. It's not a referendum. I can't change it, or I can't say, well, I don't like that, or I don't like the fact that the Father should face the people, or communion should be with a spoon and not, or whatever. It is what it is. It is what it is, and that's what we would say. So the takeaways. So these reinforce the Orthodox argument that the faith is received, not invented, which is exactly what I just said. It is preserved intact, not developed into something new, right? So in the West, I think even in Catholicism, you have this idea of sort of like this slow, like revelation of truth. I mean, the Orthodox Church would say that there are things that are new, like, for example, the saints didn't, in the first century, they didn't have surrogate mothers who could bear your child, right? So that's a new reality. But what we do as Orthodox is we take what has already been revealed and we ask, what does that tell us about this new thing, right? So there's not a changing. There's just, ideally what happens is we are so sanctified by our entrance into the church that we have enough discernment, right? We become holy. We become like saints. And with that holiness, we can discern what's right and what's wrong, what should be done and what should not be done. Both scripture and tradition serve this continuity, right? So that's an important point too, is, and I won't get into it too much because it's going to be in a class down the road, but I think something very significant, actually, here. So if you look at this flyer, so Christ ascended into heaven and Pentecost was the year 33 AD. But really, does anyone know what year the first book of the New Testament was likely written?
16.
Yeah, 80.
No, actually it's earlier. I mean, they say First Thessalonians might have been written in 55 AD, right? But keep in mind, what does that mean? That means that from 33 AD to 55 AD, 22 years, there wasn't even anything. Not only was there no Bible, there was nothing, right? So that's a long time. 22 years is a long time. I mean, that's a huge amount of time, right? So how did the church continue to exist for those 22 years? How do you think it did it? Dwayne, how did it do it?
Well, it's by their mindset, their way of living, liturgy, the liturgy that they practice.
Continuity in worship. Yeah, and really, actually, that brings up another point, and that's that really, if you think about it, and actually it's even there in the book of Acts, really the early church were a bunch of Jews. They went to the temple, they went to the synagogue, right? That's where Paul would go to preach, right? So it actually makes perfect sense that the worship of the early church would be very synagogue, temple-ish. That's what they knew. So if we want to, I mean, I think just logically, I mean, you can do whatever you want with it, but I would say logically, it's hard to argue that the early church would worship in any way other than a very Jewish looking way. Because that was the Messiah. I mean, the Messiah, right? The Messiah was this Messiah who came, right? And we think about Moses, right? And the lamb and the blood. I mean, this just all makes sense. Anyway, yes.
Actually, my impression before can I start coming to the Orthodox Church was the Orthodox priests to me, they look kind of like a little bit like a Jewish priest.
Yeah, I mean, arguably. I mean, yeah, I should wear one of those hats and grow my hair like what they do the rabbinical guys. Anyway, any other comments, questions? Anyone? Yeah.
Time, you're talking about 30 something to 50 something, right? 80, right? Long time ago.
Wait, repeat that.
So what we're talking about is a time of growth in the religion of Christianity.
Well, really, I would say that time we're talking about from 33 to 55. Really, what was happening that time was more than anything else is the Jewish church was figuring out like, what are we? Well, wait, we can have pagans. They don't have to circumcise. All that stuff is gone. So this was like really a significant, all of a sudden there was a massive radical change of this Jewish sect. And that's really what it was initially. It was just a Jewish sect, right? Of their self-understanding. Because I mean, I'm a pagan. I wouldn't have been eligible, right? At the start.
But I think their life revolved around religion. And so
yes,
you would go and you would hear some scripture,
yes,
and then you would probably listen to something about Christ, and you'd have that discussion throughout the day with your children, with
hopefully,
the family.
Hopefully.
The communication that would be about the stories you were hearing.
Sure.
So those stories stayed very succinct. You know what I mean? It wasn't like scattered. It was Christ.
It was also part of the culture.
It was part of it.
I mean, even when you go to Greece today, although it's less and less every year, I mean, if you're on a bus going by a church and you're in Greece, or maybe more so in like Russia, like half of the people, when you drive by the church, half of the people bless themselves. It's just like it's like when they hit your knee and your foot goes up. It's just, what do they call that? Reflex. It's just, it's a reflexive thing. And then the last point is the whole church acts as a guardian of the apostolic deposit, right? And a perfect example of that is there was I forget the year, I think it was the 1300s, Mark of Ephesus, St. Mark of Ephesus. So St. Mark of Ephesus, there was a council. Basically, the Orthodox were kind of getting hammered by the Muslims. And they decided, well, we really need the West, like kind of the Roman church, to kind of help us. So we went and we had a council with them, and we kind of gave up more than we should have. Right. And all the bishops, except for a few of them, Mark of Ephesus was one who didn't sign, but they all signed. And then when the bishops came back to wherever, Greece or wherever it was, the people were like, they were like running these bishops out of town, because they're like, that is not what you've agreed to, is not Orthodox, and we are not accepting it. Right. So it's not just about the Pope or some one person, right? Everyone is the guardian of the faith. Everyone is inspired.
I heard that today in one of the videos I'm watching. So that priest that was talking about it, he said that people throw them on the sea. Was that like
they threw them in the sea? They might have. I mean, people, they're very zealous.
But you think that was like an execution, or just saying like they send them back on their ships?
I don't know.
Oh.
I don't know. All I know is they rejected I think it was the Council of.
I think it was Florence.
Right? I don't even remember which one it was. Anyway.
Florence.
Oh, Florence. Yeah, it was the Council of Florence. You're right. You're right. Yeah, it's better not to make one of my little ones sin, I think. Then it's better to be thrown in the ocean with a rock around your neck than to cause one of my little ones to sin. Well, I mean, that would apply.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That would apply.
So the council was motivated to go and get help from the Romans.
Well, I think they were trying to find unity with Rome, but I think the broad church basically was like, you haven't come to an agreement. You've kind of sold us out. And so when they came back, the people were like, this is not us, and we're not taking this. And Mark of Ephesus was one who hadn't signed, so he was kind of vindicated as being in the right, even though I'm sure there was a ton of pressure on him to sign. But so there you go. So that's the end of fidelity to the original faith, in which we move on to continuity of worship. Right? So the liturgical argument. The church is not just an institution or doctrine, but a lived reality of worship, right? We talked about that, right, with the disciples, right? The disciples we hear about, like Peter and James, I think, going to the temple at the hour of prayer, right? So there was this continuity. A church that preserves the same sacramental life as the early Christians is likely to be the same church, right? So that's the argument we'll make. St. Justin Martyr, again, way before Christianity was legalized, talks about the early sort of worship of the church. Quote, "We do not receive these things as common bread," meaning communion. He's talking about Holy Communion. "We do not receive these things as common bread or common drink, but the food which has been made into the Eucharist is both the flesh and blood of that incarnate Jesus." And then a little further down, "On the day called Sunday, all who live in cities or in the country gather together to one place, and there is a distribution to each," right? St. Irenaeus, "Our opinion is in accordance with the Eucharist, and the Eucharist in turn establishes our opinion," right? So there's I forget the saying, but it's something like, that both the worship, it's a Latin expression, but something like, something basically affirming that basically the worship validates the belief and the belief validates the worship, right? So you can't have right worship and wrong belief, and you can't have wrong worship and right belief, right? They both support each other, and arguably they uphold each other. Yeah, that was it. Something like that. I mean, it's a little catchier, but close. So our opinion is according with the Eucharist, and the Eucharist in turn establishes our opinion. Irenaeus ties doctrine directly to Eucharistic worship, showing that the faith is expressed and preserved through liturgical practice, right? So that's the worship of the church. Any comments, questions, Brianna?
Random, but do we use Latin or is that a Catholic thing?
Do we use Latin or is that a Catholic thing? So we don't normally, there is, I don't want to, I could go down a rabbit hole. I'll be very brief. There is a Western Rite branch within Orthodoxy that uses some of the different liturgical worships that were pre-schism in the West, but they're very rare. To be honest, I've never been to one, and I don't even know where the closest one is. So there is a small group of Orthodox who use sort of Western practices, but they're in communion with us. They're not like, under Rome. They're under us. And I don't know if they may use Latin. I don't know. I mean, Latin is not like it's not an irreligious or heretical language. It's just a language. I mean, language has the purpose of communicating, right? So when Saint Nicholas of Japan went to Japan and evangelized the Japanese, what language do you think he translated everything into? Japanese, right? Yeah, and when Cyril and Methodius went up to the Slavs, he created the Cyrillic language so that they could worship. And when Saint Innes of Alaska went to the Aleuts in Alaska, again, he created a written language and he translated things into that language.
Interestingly, to answer her point also too, during the time of like Saint Hippolytus, when they were preaching, they actually preached in Koine Greek. Liturgy was in Greek.
But that was probably the language of the people. That's what they spoke, I'm assuming.
And I mean, not for them, but actually all liturgies were actually done not in Latin like people would think, but with
Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting.
So,
yeah. But I think generally, at least in the West, generally there's never been a thought like that one language is the language. I mean, now that we've come to America, a lot of people think that Greek should be everywhere, which is ironic. The Catholics, though,
They prevented
oh yeah, they wanted to maintain the Latin.
maintain it.
100%. When they went to South America and evangelized, all the South American people, they kept the Latin. Oh, 100%. Yeah, that's true.
It's more of a Catholic thing.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure what's behind that.
They changed.
They've dropped that. Now they do English.
Actually, everywhere they went,
We always took the language. Yeah, I mean, almost without a single exception, probably without an exception. America's kind of weird because we didn't come here to evangelize. We came here as immigrants. So like if you could go back 75 years in this parish, and you were there on a Sunday, I bet 10 people were speaking English, max. Everybody was speaking Greek, but it was all a bunch of immigrants, right? So the service was probably done in Greek. There was probably no English sermon because everybody was Greek. Yes, I would say, and again, we're kind of going down a rabbit hole, but in America, that's okay. In America, we are sort of evolving, right? We're sort of, and the reality is, I mean, we don't have immigration. I mean, I don't know how many people come from Greece every year, but it ain't many, right? And 90% of the weddings I do are someone who is Greek Orthodox, like from birth, to like, some guy who's Episcopalian and German or Italian and Lutheran, right? So the reality is that the ethnic sort of the DNA. The percentage of the DNA that is Greek here on a Sunday is declining fairly rapidly, I would say. But that's neither here nor there. Were you going to say something here?
I was just going to say one other point. I think what she's getting at. I think one of the key things about Greek is that the Old Testament, when it was mostly translated during those years, it was Greek. I forget the name of the Old Testament in Greek. There's
oh yeah, the Septuagint. Correct.
And so when you look at,
but that was the language of everybody. That's why everybody spoke it. So they wanted it in that language.
Exactly. So when you got to the New Testament, you read like the Acts and the references back to Greek, how the Septuagint was written. And so that was the explanation. And the Greek doesn't always translate well all the other languages.
Well, of course, translating is always hard, of course.
What's good about this is you have the continuity of the community of the world of Orthodoxy to keep it the same.
Yeah. So the content, even if the language changes, the essence, the content, the guts are preserved.
Yes.
100%. I'm going to pick up speed a little bit, so forgive me. We talk about this. So key takeaways across these sources, what we just were looking at, consistent elements of worship, right? So we see this consistent throughout history within Orthodoxy. There's a continuity with how the worship was done today, with how the worship was done, 2,000 years ago. The weekly gathering on Sunday, which obviously that hasn't really been lost anywhere. The Eucharist is the center, right? And a very much structured prayer and thanksgiving, strong sacramental theology. The Eucharist is the body and blood of Christ. Worship involves this bloodless sacrifice, right? Liturgical actions affect real grace, right? So, what we would say in Orthodoxy is that, the sacraments are real. Like they have grace in them. They literally possess grace. I was just talking to somebody the other day about confession, and he was asking me, like, why do we need to go to confession? Not cynically, but just genuinely. And one of the reasons I said, I love going to confession because I get a big dose of grace. And who couldn't use a little more grace? Right? That's kind of what I told him, right? So there's objective grace in this thing. Continuity with Orthodoxy. These descriptions align closely with the Orthodox practice, which we said. Divine liturgy, sacramental realism, priest-led Eucharistic worship. So that's that. Any comments on continuity of worship? All right. And then so the witness of the early church fathers, right? So Orthodoxy appeals heavily to the writings of the early Christian theologians like Ignatius, Irenaeus, Athanasius. These writings describe a church that looks structurally and sacramentally like Orthodoxy, right? There's a hierarchical structure. There's an episcopacy. There are bishops. There's a Eucharistic centrality. There's a liturgical life, emphasis on tradition. When you compare the early church, so the first 4 centuries, with modern churches, Orthodoxy most closely matches what those sources describe. So you do the math. St. Ignatius of Antioch says, where the bishop is, there, this is St. Ignatius again, I forgot, I think it was like 180. So right again, before the legalization of Christianity. This is early Christianity. He says, where the bishop is, there let the multitude of believers be. Even as where Jesus Christ is, there is the Catholic Church. Dawson.
Just this like maybe a softball question, but for anyone who doesn't know, why is it so important to listen to the early church fathers? Why can't I just read the Bible?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, I think just logically, the early fathers were closer to Christ, right? They were closer to the original sources. Obviously, a lot of things that they had, we don't even have. It's interesting because I think it was St. Photios. Actually, it's actually fascinating to think about. St. Photios, who lived, I think, in the 1300s, no, he was in the 900s, wrote a book where in the book, he comments on all of these ancient books that he had in his library. And it's interesting because many of the books he comments on, it's the only place they appear in the world. Like we literally don't know what the book is. We don't have the book. There's no other reference to the book, right? So I guess I would say that they are, objectively, they are closer to the source, right? It's like water, right? Do you want to get, if you have a really good, fresh fountain of water and you could get it right at the source, or maybe just a couple feet from the source, or you can get it like a mile down, which would you prefer? Right? Yeah, Lydia.
So I was in the background where soul Victoria, the center role.
Yeah, if you could grab that, sweetie. Thank you.
Going from Protestant, or like soul Victoria is like the big thing that they claim.
Sure.
It always goes back to the Bible. How do you, when it comes to the church fathers and all that stuff, and compared to the Bible, how does Orthodox see all of those when it comes to authority? I don't know, like in comparison.
Yeah, so it's interesting because you say that, it makes me think. So really, if you think about especially you said the word authority, which is good. I would say, I'm Orthodox. I'm going to give you the Orthodox shtick, right? I would say that the Catholic Church has sort of an oversimplified understanding of authority in the Pope, right? Because he's it, right? And really, to be honest, in some sense, the scripture to Protestants is not really that different from the Pope to Catholics, right? You have this sort of central thing or person that is somehow the definitive source of truth and knowledge, right? And I would say as Orthodox Christians, we reject both. We would just say that it's far more fluid. We would say that truth resides in the church. That's why, the 7 ecumenical councils, which are not a book or a person, are for us, they are the end all be all. They are the definitive sort of description of what is true. And I guess part of the thing too with scripture, at least with the New Testament, is the church existed for a long time without, the Bible that we know it. So right now, so let me clarify terms. The New Testament, let me go even further. So when we talk about the Bible really has two components. It has what we call the Old Testament, which I think is 64 books, depending on which canon you use. So the Old Testament is Genesis, Job, Isaiah, blah, blah, blah. That's 64 books. Then you have the New Testament. So the Old Testament is everything before Jesus Christ, and the New Testament is everything from Jesus Christ forward, right? And the New Testament is 27 books. Oh boy, I was going to make a point. Oh, it's always dangerous. What was I going to say? I think what I was saying is, yeah. So we don't have, the first historical record where we have a list that is the exact 27 books we now use and we call the New Testament is from like 354. So that is 322 years after Christ ascended into heaven, right? So let me expand on that. So and I said a minute ago, right? So the first book even wasn't written until like 55 AD. So you got 22 years between Christ's ascension and the first book being written. And then really the last book was probably written sometime between 95 and 100 AD, maybe like the book of Revelations, right? So for like 67 years, you objectively don't have all that the New Testament is, right? So again, how did the church exist? And so I would say, what I would say is that what Orthodoxy I think would say is that, to kind of look at it, we have the church, and out of the church has come the scriptures, has come the liturgical worship, has come the traditions, just oral traditions, has come the ecumenical councils, has come all of the creedal statements, has come, and all of those things really are from the church. And to be honest with you, that's a disagreeable thing because we want a pope, right? I go to a pope. I can ask the pope a question. I can't ask this nebulous thing called the church a question. I guess I could ask ChatGPT, right? Maybe that's a joke. So it's in some sense it's kind of like disagreeable, but I also think I mean, I would say, let me put it this way. I think the argument for the Pope is far more defendable than sola scriptura. Just because at least you could say there was, but I mean, the problem with the Pope too is, anyway, there's a lot of issues there. But yes, Justin, did that help, Lydia? Okay. I mean, did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
And going with your point of sola scriptura, it touches a central part of Protestant and why there's so many just reasons.
Well, I mean, that's another
Denominations, right? It should be interpreted the exact same way by everyone. It's not. I would say that's kind of a way to disprove soul. Sola scriptura.
Can you guys on the internet, can you hear Justin talking? Was he audible? Mediocre? Okay. So I think his microphones are screwed up. Anyway, sorry. Yes.
Could you, I know there's a lot of, Protestants that follow sola scriptura.
I'll repeat the question for you online, just for the record. Yes.
They'll still, listen to a pastor sort of, delineate what the scripture is saying most of the time, necessarily all the time. Couldn't you, look at that sort of, pastoral point?
Better because we're closer to the spring.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the only difference I would say is that exactly there. I mean, the fact is there were lots of heretical groups. There were the Marcions and all these different groups. Yeah, there were the Gnostics actually was a whole bunch of different groups. The Gnosticism is not really one thing. It's a ton of things. So I mean, yes. I mean, at some point though, we have to say who has the most tenable argument to have set to defend the fact that they actually maintain the truth. Like what is most likely the reality of the truth that the early church understood? Yeah, Dwayne.
And the other thing.
I don't think that thing works, so forget about it.
Other thing.
Sorry, Zoom people.
The other thing to consider is that when you go to sola scriptura, oftentimes too, then you're doing your own theologizing, and that's dangerous because most people aren't prepared to theologize, they could be mistaken. They're not developed really in their understandings. Therefore, it needs to be mediated by, the Orthodox would say the church fathers, like you said, have some of them. They have a connection to the sources because of apostolic succession and everything else, so they would know the correct understandings and they would be the best to theologize on it, not some individual just because sola scriptura is a thing saying, well, I can make understanding of what scripture is telling me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could also say in some sense, there's safety in numbers, right? So if you have all of the holy fathers of the first 4 centuries and they kind of basically agree, I mean, I'm sure they had some variances in areas, right? But certainly if they, mostly agree or all agree, then that seems to be in itself some sort of a validation of the truth. Yeah, John?
2 real simple thoughts about the scriptura of Protestantism. You couldn't have a Bible without.
Well, and that's true too. The Bible was produced by, correct. It was produced and it was agreed on. I mean, this 27 books we have now, it was literally a bunch of bishops in a council. Actually, I think there's 2 records that are the earliest records. One is an Easter letter written by St. Athanasius the Patriarch of Alexandria, that lists all 27 books. And then there was a council in
Jerusalem.
I don't know where it was.
Okay.
There was a council right around the same. They're both in like the mid 350s that also has the exact, and those are literally, at least in terms of what exists, there might be other lists that predate that we haven't found. But those are the earliest ones that have those exact 27 books.
Saint
Yeah,
Ignatius wasn't he a disciple of Saint John the Apostle? I believe
he was either a disciple of one of them or a disciple of one of their disciples.
think he was because I remember researching. I think that was the first time the word Catholic appeared in a written document.
Okay. All right. It's
Like to interpret, who can interpret like with sola scriptura, what I think is who can interpret what Saint John will say better.
well, then one of his pupils,
disciples.
correct.
Right.
John, did you have something you wanted to say?
I was just saying about Protestantism. So one of the things that comes up when you have this argument or you want to talk about it is mosaics and painting a picture with the mosaics through the early church fathers. You can actually paint a picture the way Jesus would have painted the picture. But sola scriptura, I can take each one of those verses from all the different 27
Sure.
books and I can put them wherever I want. Protestants also are missing some of the Old Testament that is actually referenced in the New Testament, but they also choose not to look at those verses.
Well, I guess another thing too, and I'm kind of riffing here, but one thing that's interesting about the New Testament is we really are the Old Testament basically, or not the Old Testament, the New Testament is basic. Most of it, at least all of Paul's letters, is basically like me being on a phone call with Justin, who is in the other side of town, and Adrian is with me. And Adrian hears my side of the conversation, but he has no idea what Justin is saying, right? Because that's what it is. We're getting letters. Paul got a letter from Corinth. We have no idea what was in it. We really don't. I mean, we try to sort of dissect, and obviously some of it can be understood, right? But again, who would be more equipped to know the other side of the conversation, right? Ignatius, who lived in the 2nd century, or Calvin, who lived in the 16th century? I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that to be mean. It just seems like a plausible thing to think. I'm going to try to get to the end of this section and then we'll quit. It's 8:02, so forgive me for running late. St. John of Damascus, we do not change the everlasting boundaries which our fathers have set, but we keep the tradition just as we received it. And he lived in the 8th century, so he's a little bit later. Meaning the church's structure and life are preserved, not reinvented. We talked about that before. This is from a catechetical book by St. Philaret of Moscow, who is very recent, 19th century. The church is a divinely instituted society of men united by the Orthodox faith, the law of God, the hierarchy, and the sacraments. So across 2,000 years, a consistent pattern emerges, right? The church is visible and structured, right? I said that earlier. It's not some invisible thing and we don't know who's in it. It is visible and structured. There are bishops, there are priests, there are deacons, not an invisible or purely spiritual association. Authority is apostolic and communal, right? So it passes down from the apostles, but it's also something that is communally guarded. Right? It's all of our responsibility to know the truth and to defend the truth. It's passed down through ordination, exercised in unity in the councils of the bishops. The church is one across time and space, same faith, same structure everywhere. Tradition is lived, not invented, right? So in some sense, I mean, you could say, like, when my kids in 20 years, God willing, when my kids are married and they have kids and they're in their living room saying evening prayers, you know what's going to have influenced how they say their evening prayers? How Father Pandelemon now says evening prayers with them. Makes sense? Right? They're gonna cross themselves. They're gonna do their prostrations. They're gonna read the 50th Psalm. They're gonna do the small compline because that's what we did, and that's how the church is, right? It carries it down. It passes the baton right to the next generation. So it's preserved rather than redesigned. Mark of Ephesus, that's the guy I mentioned earlier who was faithful to the truth. The church is ultimately the body of Christ, both institutional and mystical. I'm going to stop there. So it's 8:05. I don't like to run late. Any questions?
Would you,
Was that helpful? Just to give me some feedback? It's always nice to, okay,
Go now.
go.
Bus?
No, don't miss the bus. Yeah, don't miss the bus. Yes. Oh, I think I just cut him off. Hold on. I wasn't thinking. I forgot about Zoom. Oh, geez. I hope I didn't. Let's see. Oh, forgive me. Hold on one second, Dawson. Oh, shame on me. Here we go. Oh, you guys are still there. I thought I closed the computer on you. So don't leave. Stay. Good. All right, Dawson.
a funny question, would you be able to keep going? But my real question,
There's more to come. Don't worry. I want to get home too. I'm tired.
my real question is, would you have access to this?
Yeah, I can just convert it into a PDF.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think what I would do with it. Um,
I need to choose.
I'm trying to think where I could like put it. You know what I'll do is I'll see if I can get the video of this because I'm recording this and also the PDF of my deck on the website.
Okay.
I don't know if I'll be able to, but I'll try. Actually, you know what I'll do even better is I will just put this up. I'm just going to put this up on YouTube anyway. So if you put my name into YouTube and you go to like my channel and you go to the playlists, this is going to be a playlist. And what I'll do is in the notes, I'll put the deck for this class as like a Google Doc available to one and all.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh yeah. Tell me your name one more time. Forgive me. Nolan. Oh, you volunteered for the Greek Fest. Ah, you're the Nolan. Okay. I saw you on the list. Yes, Nolan.
Silly question. I'm not sure.
So prior to 2 weeks, you were going to a non-denominational church.
Non-denominational.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So, why do we bless ourselves? I mean, that's a pretty good rudimentary question. So I would say a couple things. I think, first of all, I would say that when we bless ourselves, we're actually making sort of a doctrinal affirmation, right? So, because I don't know if you know, but I'll tell you anyway. So we put the first three fingers together, right? And so that reminds us that we don't believe in three gods. We believe in one God, right? So it's together. But we believe that one God reveals himself in three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, right? So this is a kind of an affirmation of the Trinity. And then the two fingers that are down we believe that Jesus Christ came down from heaven, right? So they're down, and he was fully God and fully man, right? So this alone is really a doctrinal statement. And then I think the sign of the cross is just something that we've always felt is something, that's powerful. I mean, in terms of the actual history, I couldn't tell you. I don't know. Like, I know St. Basil makes some references to it, and he says that it's something that had always been done. So he references, he lived in the 4th century, and so presumably it's at least 100 or more years old. But that's as much as I can tell you, Nolan. Any other questions?
There's even, I think, St. Athanasius on the Incarnation. I think he talks about the actual spiritual power.
Well, that's part of it too. I mean, I think they would say that there is a power that is present in the making of the sign of the cross and the wearing of the cross, and the priest has a blessing cross. These are things that we would say have, again, sort of an objective spiritual power to them. And the demons don't like them. We bless ourselves. The demons don't like that. So, anything else? Let's close with a prayer. Oh, did you have a question, Samuel? Yeah, you got to unmute yourself. Please sit for 1 second. Got one more question. Yeah, Samuel.
Hello? Yeah.
Yep,
So
I can
when
hear
I was at liturgy, I heard the term archbishop, and I was wondering what that is and like
what is an archbishop?
What the authority they have.
So so we have, I mean, the most generic term is we have hierarchs, right? So there's sort of 3 levels of ordination in the Orthodox Church. There's a deacon who he's really just a helper. He doesn't actually do anything. He doesn't like consecrate anything, or he doesn't say the prayers and stuff. So he's really like a helper. Then there's the priest, which is what I am. The priest can actually do things. He's limited. There's some things he can't do. He can't ordain. There's a few other things he can't do. Um, and then the highest ranking is the hierarch or a bishop. So there's a bunch over the course of history, there's a bunch of different like titles that a hierarch can have. He can be a bishop, he can be a metropolitan, he can be an archbishop, and all of those are really, Samuel, they're just really more like honorific. So for example, in the early church, if you were the bishop of a huge city, you would be a metropolitan, and all the other bishops sort of in your region would be bishops, right? And an archbishop, ostensibly an archbishop should be higher than a metropolitan, but really all of those things are just sort of, they all have the same power in terms of kind of sacramental grace, but they just have different names because maybe one's in a bigger city or one has a bigger area, or like the guy in Constantinople is actually called a patriarch, right? So the patriarch, there's not a lot of patriarchs. Those are like the highest ranking, but again, they're all, in terms of the sacramental power, they're all equal. Does that make sense? So it's
Yeah, that
just
makes
sort of
sense.
verbiage. Yeah.
Mhm.
Anything else? Anyone on Zoom? Christine, Nikki, Dino, anybody? Perry, David Perry. No, we're good. All right. Let's close with a prayer. My hope is Father, my refuge is the Son, my shelter, the Holy Spirit, O Holy Trinity, glory be to thee. Amen.